The morning sky over occupied Europe looked calm from a distance, but for the pilots of the 8th Air Force, it never meant safety. In early 1944, long-range escort missions had become routine for American fighter pilots flying the P-51 Mustang. The aircraft was fast, long-legged, and deadly, yet every mission still carried the same risk. One mistake, one lucky burst from German flak or fighters, and the war could end in seconds. That day, a lone P-51 pilot was deep inside enemy territory, far beyond the comfort of friendly lines. His assignment was simple in theory: escort bombers, engage enemy fighters if necessary, and return home. The reality was chaos. German interceptors were rising from multiple airfields, and anti-aircraft fire stitched black bursts across the sky. The Mustang pilot broke formation during a swirling engagement, chasing a German fighter that dove toward the clouds. For a few moments, it was just speed, instinct, and survival. Then the hit came. Not dramatic, not explosive, just sudden. The engine shuddered, the cockpit filled with the smell of oil and smoke, and the Mustang began to lose power. The aircraft that had carried him safely through countless sorties was now dying beneath him. He tried to nurse the engine, adjusting mixture and throttle, but it was useless. The propeller slowed, the nose dropped, and gravity took control. Bailing out over Germany meant capture at best and death at worst. He scanned the ground below while gliding down, looking for anything that could give him a chance. Fields, roads, forests, and scattered buildings rushed upward. He spotted an airstrip in the distance, long and straight, unmistakably a military airfield. German markings were visible even from altitude. Landing there sounded insane, but the alternative was worse. With no engine power, the Mustang became a glider. He lined up carefully, heart pounding, knowing one wrong move would tear the aircraft apart. The landing was rough, but survivable. The P-51 slid across the field, sparks flying as the propeller struck the ground. When it finally stopped, silence fell. No friendly voices, no rescue crews, only enemy territory and limited time. He wasted none of it. He climbed out of the cockpit and ran. Nearby, German ground crews were already reacting, shouting and pointing. Then he saw it. Parked not far from the runway stood a German fighter, intact and ready. Accounts vary on the exact model, but the situation was the same regardless. It was a Luftwaffe aircraft, fueled, armed, and unattended for just long enough. The decision was instant. There was no plan, no time to think through consequences. He reached the aircraft, climbed into the cockpit, and relied on training, observation, and luck. American pilots studied enemy aircraft extensively. They knew the layouts, the controls, the basics needed to get one airborne. The engine coughed, then roared to life. German soldiers were now running toward him, firing wildly, but the fighter was already rolling. Moments later, the aircraft lifted off German soil, with an American at the controls. Flying low to avoid radar and flak, he turned west. Every second in the air felt unreal. One wrong control input, one unfamiliar system failure, and it would be over. Yet the aircraft responded. The sky opened ahead, and the border between enemy territory and hope slowly closed behind him. By the time he crossed into friendly airspace, the danger had not fully passed, but survival was now possible. Anti-aircraft gunners on the Allied side were stunned to see a German fighter approaching from the east. Recognition signals and frantic radio calls prevented disaster. When he finally landed, the story sounded impossible even to those who heard it firsthand. Part 1 of this story ends not with celebration, but with disbelief. A man who had taken off in an American Mustang returned in an enemy aircraft, not through heroics alone, but through calm judgment under pressure. The full weight of what he had done would only sink in later. When the aircraft rolled to a stop on the Allied airfield, no one moved at first. Ground crews stared at the unfamiliar silhouette, fingers hovering near weapons, unsure whether this was a mistake or a trick. Only when the canopy opened and an American pilot climbed out did the confusion turn into stunned silence. He was exhausted, filthy with oil and dust, but alive. Within minutes, intelligence officers surrounded him, pulling him away from the aircraft before anyone else could ask questions. The debrief that followed felt almost unreal. He explained how his P-51 had been hit, how the engine failed, and how he had glided into a German airfield with no other option. The room went quiet when he described seeing the enemy fighter sitting there, ready to fly. Some officers exchanged skeptical looks. Others leaned forward, listening closely. Every detail mattered, because stories like this often grew with retelling. But his account stayed precise. He described the cockpit layout, the startup sequence, the feel of the controls. It matched what intelligence already knew. Mechanics examined the German fighter while he spoke. The aircraft was authentic, undamaged, and clearly flown recently. There was no doubt anymore. He had done what most pilots would never even consider. Not out of bravado, but because he understood one simple truth: survival depended on action, not hesitation. Word spread quickly through the base. Pilots gathered in small groups, replaying the story again and again. Some laughed in disbelief. Others shook their heads, imagining themselves in the same position. The war had produced many heroes, but this was different. There was no gunfight, no dramatic last stand, just a chain of decisions made under extreme pressure, each one slightly more unlikely than the last. For intelligence officers, the captured aircraft was almost as valuable as the man who flew it in. Enemy fighters were rarely obtained intact, and this one offered insights into German engineering, performance limits, and weaknesses. Engineers measured everything. Test pilots would later fly it under controlled conditions. All of it came from a single forced landing that could have ended very differently. The pilot himself struggled to process what had happened. Only hours earlier, he had been bracing for capture or death. Now he was safe, sitting under Allied control, answering questions while mechanics admired the enemy aircraft outside. The adrenaline faded, replaced by fatigue and a strange sense of detachment. It felt less like a daring escape and more like something that had happened to someone else. In the days that followed, the story reached higher command. Some details were officially recorded, others quietly set aside. Wartime documentation was never perfect, and not every extraordinary event fit neatly into reports. What mattered most was that the pilot survived and returned with information that could save others. Back in the air war over Europe, nothing slowed down. Bombers kept flying, fighters kept escorting, and pilots kept taking off knowing they might not come back. Yet among those who heard the story, it left a mark. It reminded them that training mattered, that preparation mattered, and that even in the most hopeless moments, understanding your enemy could become your lifeline. In the weeks after the incident, the story quietly worked its way through squadrons across the theater. It was never officially celebrated, never turned into a morale poster or radio broadcast. The war had little patience for legends that distracted from the next mission. Still, pilots talked. They always did. And when they did, the story changed the way many of them thought about survival. Training officers began emphasizing something they had always taught but now framed differently. Know the enemy aircraft as well as your own. Not just silhouettes or performance charts, but cockpit layouts, engine behavior, startup routines. What had once sounded like academic knowledge now felt urgent. The pilot's escape proved that information could mean the difference between capture and freedom. The German fighter itself became a silent teacher. Test pilots flew it carefully, pushing it just enough to understand its strengths and limits. Reports circulated describing its climb rate, turning behavior, and weaknesses at altitude. These details fed back into tactics, subtly shaping how Allied pilots approached combat. No one could trace those changes directly to a single stolen aircraft, but the chain was there all the same. For the pilot who flew at home, life returned to something resembling normal duty, though normal in wartime was always relative. He flew again, but with a different awareness. He had seen the war from the other side of the fence, sat in an enemy cockpit, trusted an unfamiliar engine with his life. That experience stayed with him. Combat no longer felt like a simple contest of sides. It felt mechanical, fragile, dependent on countless variables that could flip in an instant. What haunted him most was how close the margin had been. One locked canopy, one guard staying behind, one unfamiliar switch set wrong. Any of it would have ended the story very differently. The war was full of men who had made the wrong choice by a second or two. He knew that luck had played its part, but he also knew luck favored those who acted. As the air war intensified, losses mounted on both sides. New pilots arrived with fewer hours, fewer instincts. Stories like his became quiet lessons passed down in mess halls and briefing rooms. Not glorified, not exaggerated, just reminders that thinking mattered as much as flying skill. That understanding the machine, any machine, could give you one last chance when everything else failed. Years later, after the war had ended and Europe had rebuilt itself from the ruins, the event survived mostly in fragments, a line in a report, a photograph in an archive, a few men who remembered hearing it firsthand. History often works that way. It preserves outcomes, but loses the tension, the fear, the seconds where everything balanced on a decision no one else could make. Yet the essence of the story endured. A damaged aircraft, an enemy airfield, a pilot who refused to accept the obvious ending. It captured something fundamental about aerial warfare in the Second World War. Speed, improvisation, and the constant need to adapt. Technology mattered, numbers mattered, but above all, the human element mattered. This was not a tale of heroics shouted into the sky. It was a quiet example of survival through awareness. In a war defined by overwhelming force, one man used knowledge and nerve to slip through the cracks of chaos. He did not win the war that day. He did not change its course alone. But he proved that even in the most controlled, mechanized conflict the world had ever seen, a single clear-headed decision could still carry someone home. The story of the P-51 Mustang pilot who stole a German fighter did not end when he landed safely on Allied soil. That moment, while extraordinary, was only the beginning of understanding how fragile, chaotic, and human the air war truly was. The weeks and months that followed revealed lessons not just about aircraft, but about strategy, survival, and the unpredictable nature of combat. Allied intelligence quickly realized the value of the captured aircraft. Pilots who had never seen a Luftwaffe fighter up close were given briefings, photographs, and in some cases the rare opportunity to fly the enemy plane under controlled conditions. It was more than just curiosity. Engineers dissected every detail, the throttle response, the handling at altitude, even the location of levers and switches in the cockpit. Understanding the enemy's capabilities allowed Allied pilots to refine tactics, adjust formations, and prepare for engagements with far greater precision. The war was fought not just with bullets, but with knowledge. Meanwhile, the pilot himself continued flying missions. His return had made him a subject of fascination, but also of quiet concern. Command recognized that he had taken risks beyond what regulations allowed, and yet they could not deny the tactical intelligence gained from his actions. He flew again, escorting bombers and engaging in dogfights, but with a new understanding. The war was not a simple matter of shooting down planes. It was a complex dance of speed, altitude, positioning, and the ability to anticipate what an enemy might do in the split seconds that separated life from death. The winter of 1944 brought harsher conditions. Weather became as much an enemy as the Luftwaffe. Snow and fog limited visibility, ice accumulated on wings, and engines struggled in the thin air at high altitudes. Pilots relied on experience, instruments, and instinct to survive. Each sortie tested not only their skill, but their physical and mental endurance. Many of the young men who had joined the Air Forces only a few months earlier were no longer green recruits. They were hardened, scarred, and constantly aware of how quickly fortune could turn against them. In Germany, the effects of the pilots' daring escape were far less obvious, but no less real. Airfield crews were forced to increase security, aircraft were accounted for more rigorously, and even small lapses in attention could no longer be tolerated. The Luftwaffe was losing both men and machines at an accelerating rate, and incidents like this undermined morale. If an American pilot could take your aircraft and fly it home, what else might go wrong in the chaos of constant sorties? That question lingered in the minds of German commanders and pilots alike. Back on the Allied side, the story became part of an unofficial curriculum. Young pilots were taught to study enemy aircraft, to memorize cockpit layouts, and to be prepared for situations where improvisation could save their lives. Manuals were updated, and intelligence briefings became more detailed. Survival, it was clear, depended not only on the reliability of the Mustang, but on the pilot's ability to adapt to whatever circumstances unfolded in the sky. Every lesson learned could mean the difference between returning home and becoming a casualty of war. As the months passed, the pilot began to reflect on the experience more deeply. He remembered the moment he first saw the German fighter sitting on the field, perfectly functional, untouched by war until he arrived. The decision to take it was instantaneous, instinctive, and fraught with risk. Yet in that instant, he realized the war was not a static contest. It was fluid, unpredictable, and dictated by the smallest decisions made in the heat of the moment. Each maneuver, each adjustment, each choice mattered far more than anyone on the ground could see. The intelligence gathered from the captured aircraft and from his accounts fed directly into tactical improvements. American formations became more flexible, capable of responding to sudden enemy attacks. Dogfight strategies were refined to exploit weaknesses in German designs. Bombing runs could be planned with more confidence, knowing how interceptors might behave under pressure. The actions of a single pilot had ripple effects far beyond his own survival. By the spring of 1945, the cumulative impact of the air war was undeniable. The Luftwaffe was no longer a cohesive fighting force. Pilots were inexperienced, aircraft were scarce, and fuel shortages grounded many missions before they could even take off. Allied dominance in the skies allowed bomber formations to strike deeper into Germany with reduced losses. Supply lines were disrupted, transportation hubs destroyed, and the German war economy strained to the breaking point. Every action, every sortie, every maneuver learned from captured aircraft or personal experience amplified the strategic effect of Allied air power. For the Mustang pilot, the war became a series of calculated risks. Each mission demanded precision, endurance, and careful thought. Yet, despite the danger, he never forgot the lessons learned from that single stolen fighter. It was a reminder that opportunity often arises in the most desperate circumstances, that knowledge, courage, and timing could carry a man out of seemingly impossible situations. And in a war defined by overwhelming technology and industrial power, the human element, the decisions made in seconds, remained decisive. As Europe began to see the end of hostilities, the impact of his actions and those of countless others like him was clear. The skies once contested with ferocity and deadly consequence were now controlled by those who had mastered them through a combination of skill, courage, and intelligence. The war had not ended because the Luftwaffe was destroyed on the ground alone, but because the Allies had learned to dominate every aspect of the air domain: planning, execution, adaptability, and anticipation. And so, the tale of the Mustang pilot who flew a German fighter home survives not as a sensational anecdote, but as a testament to the extraordinary interplay of skill, courage, and circumstance that defined aerial warfare in World War II. It stands as a reminder that even amidst immense destruction and chaos, the clarity of thought and willingness to act could tip the scales between life and death, defeat and survival, and ultimately shape the course of history.